Today, we're going to be talking about how to make a film that's going to serve as a great credit, a great festival entry, and maybe even something you can sell. I think this is an important event because things, if things go wrong on your first film, the chance that you're going to make a second film goes down significantly. And that's something that you decide. And you make that decision in the earliest days of your film project. You decide very early on what kind of project it's going to be. You will start determining what you're going to spend, when it's going to be finished, what it will showcase, and where it will be seen. Your first film is almost certainly not going to be financially profitable, particularly in the short term. And in that sense, it's a true investment. And it's a key investment because you're likely to spend thousands of dollars on it, and it will be a key calling card for years to come. Producing a film has risks and costs that have to be addressed. And it may create tax advantages and tax deductions that you qualify for. But in order to take advantage of those benefits, you really need to get specific advice related to your project and your situation from experts. This workshop is meant to provide a framework and a footing to help you become familiar with the process, not serve as a one-size-fits-all advice. I have done several workshops where I've talked to attorneys about issues like copyright, contract law, etc., which you can find on my website. Check the episodes to get some understanding of the fundamentals. When it comes to defining what's a triumph and what's a disaster, I think we have to really be candid about what's going to make your film a success or how you're going to define success versus how you're going to define failure. For example, personally consider a disaster to be a first film that costs lots of time and money and never actually gets made. And that is a huge percentage of first films. In fact, almost any film that starts with the sentence, "It's a $5 million film. It's my first film, and I know that's a lot, but I'm still going to produce a $5 million first film." With $1 million, you can buy a house. With 5 million, you can build an apartment building. So they are going to produce a film at this level, and they have never invested a film before. That's a lot of red flags, and it usually spells disaster. It takes serious upfront capital to set up films at that budget level. There's a whole lot of issues that go along with the idea of producing a really expensive film like that. And since most new producers don't understand that kind of thing, when they start talking about producing $1 million or a $5 million film, or even a $500,000 film, I start to get really itchy because I think you're pretty much headed for disaster unless you have other people working with you who have produced films at that budget level, in which case chances are you don't really have to do that very much. You just have to watch them work. It makes me wonder what you are bringing to the table that they will let you do that. I also think it's a disaster when a film causes you legal problems, whether you run afoul of the employment people here in the state of California who expect everybody to get a minimum wage and expect everybody to have workers' comp insurance if they're working on a set, whether or not you own the rights to the script that you're shooting, whether you have releases from your DP or your actors, whether you're good enough records or you haven't set up a business. All those legal problems can spell disaster for a new filmmaker. Sometimes people do get around to producing a film, but it is not well done, so it makes them look incompetent or unprofessional. For example, it has bad sound, the actors are miscast, it has a script that's not well written. Those kinds of things represent a film that, though it's produced and may have been educational to produce, doesn't actually meet the requirement of being a film that's going to serve you well in years to come. In fact, it's the kind of film you're going to be hiding from and you're going to be praying nobody ever gets to see. A disaster film, a bad film, makes it so you have to learn everything the hard way, and it makes you want to quit. It makes you never want to make another movie again for the rest of your life. A triumph is a film that's quickly finished, in my opinion. It provides good value for dollars. Let's say you spend $10,000 or $20,000 or $50,000 on the film, but it looks like you spend $500,000. The triumph demonstrates what you do best, creates good connections because your behavior on set and the business that you set up and the way that you treat your cast and crew all combine together to make people have nothing but good things to say about you. That kind of reputation is very important here in Hollywood because when you get a bad reputation, people know about it, people hear about it year after year. And when you have a good reputation, people hear about that year after year as well. And finally, a triumph of a film is something that makes you want to do the next film. After years of watching people do this and having worked with a number of people on their first films and also having worked with people that are more skilled and have produced lots of projects, I think the most important thing you can do is actually set very specific objectives. Is your objective to learn how to produce a film? That's a perfectly good reason to decide to produce your first film. The best way to learn how to make movies is actually to start making movies. So that's one objective, learn how to produce a film. Tell people about things that matter to me. A lot of people especially a lot of people that come to my events, many of them have the desire to create some kind of activist media. Sometimes they want to talk about climate change. Sometimes they want to talk about the economy. Sometimes they want to talk about social issues. People who want to talk to the world have used films ever since they were invented in order as a means of communication. And creating that kind of media sometimes can be a great way for a filmmaker to get discovered. If you produce a documentary about poverty or you produce a documentary about the foster care system, that can be a great way for you as a filmmaker, even as a documentary filmmaker or as a regular filmmaker, to create something that is widely liked and that gets you a lot of work going forward and creates you a lot of opportunity going forward. Sometimes people want to produce a film because they are actors or writers or producers, and they want to work with their friends. They want to try to collaborate. And sometimes it's a great creative event. Sometimes it's a great social event. Sometimes people want to create a film because they want to sell it for a profit. Sometimes they create a film because they want to go to submit it to film festivals and win, so they can say that they're an award-winning producer or an award-winning writer or an award-winning performer. Sometimes they want to create a film that proves their creative worth as a producer, writer, director, or performer. If you think about Quentin Tarantino, he wouldn't have a career if he hadn't had the opportunity to produce a number of independent films. I think Reservoir Dogs and so forth gave some sense of his voice and some sense of his ability to capture the eye and to stir the heart. And it made it so people were willing to give him more and more money over time. George Lucas started his career with THX 1138. Sometimes people are creating a film that they feel strongly that they want something that they own, that they can do pretty much whatever they want to with. And they don't want to get into debt. They don't want to get into legal or tax trouble. You may have other objectives. There could be a million different reasons why you want to produce a film, but you need to be able to write down what your specific objectives are, because every decision you make after that is going to be based upon those decisions. I personally think if you want a painless, straightforward, easy to produce film, that you should really pick no more than 3 of these kinds of objectives. So for example, if I say, I want to learn how to produce a film, I want to tell people about things that matter to me, and I want to create a film I can own completely without going into debt or creating legal or tax trouble, that's a straightforward film, right? Because I don't have to work with my friends, which brings its own hassles. I don't have to worry about trying to make a profit. All I'm going to try to do is produce something that's cheap and straightforward, that talks about the thing that I want to talk about. It sets up a whole set of decisions for me that make my life easier. If I said that I want to create a film where I work with my friends and that I can submit to film festivals and win, that's great. It makes your film so much more straightforward when you know that your big objective is to work with your friends. That's a key issue. You don't want to produce it if you're not working with your friends. So if you bring your friends on board and they cause trouble, okay, there's no problem with that, because part of your reason for doing the film at all is to have that social engagement. My point is, be really clear upon your objectives and use those objectives to make decisions for you, right? If you say that you're going to create a film that proves your creative worth as a producer, writer, director, or performer, that means you're going to be the one making the decisions. If you want to prove your worth as a writer, you're going to be the screenwriter. You're not going to bring in an outside screenwriter. And since you want to make sure you have total control, you're probably going to be the writer, producer, director. Those 3 things together cut down your costs rather remarkably, because for a fact that you're going to be producing the film. So you don't have to look for people to play those roles. You may look for additional consultations or advice, but you don't bring anybody else onto the project because you want to showcase your skills. I think if you start with a clear set of objectives and you know exactly what they are, you sidestep a lot of hassles and a lot of problems. And if you don't, what happens is you try to do 5 or 6 of these things at one time. I want to make a film with my friends that I can sell for a profit, that I can submit to film festivals and win, and I don't want to get into legal or tax trouble. Okay, do you have a lot of money? Because that's what that's going to take. You're increasing your costs dramatically with every single one of those things that you tack onto your project. The next thing is really important. If you think about a film as just 90 good minutes, it really makes a huge difference to the ease with which you can produce a project. In my experience, most people that produce films for a living really do think in terms of good minutes. They need 90 good minutes for a film. And if they're producing a short film, it's basically going to be between 10 and 40 minutes. 40 is pretty much the longest you can have a film and still call it short. And a documentary will usually be between 60 and 90 minutes. When you understand that your objective is just to get 90 good minutes, you might start with a minute of footage from Pond 5, an opening establishing shot created with drones. That's 1 minute down, and 10 minutes in the living room of the haunted house, and 5 minutes in the bedroom, right? If you really start thinking about your film minute to minute, it gets much easier to produce. Good plays really become good feature films because they all take place on a single stage. They often represent just 1 to 3 locations. So they have set changes to make you go from place to place. The characters and situations are inherently interesting because they have to be. So as you're starting to produce a project, particularly if it's going to be a feature film, start reading good plays and you'll start seeing how to size and scope your project for a good feature film. You want lots of drama, a good hook that engages people, and a small cast. If you were producing a short film, you want to look at one-act plays because they're almost always set in a single location with just 1 to 3 characters. If you plan your feature film and start reading plays and start reading one-act plays, you'll get a sense for what your script should look like. When it comes to documentaries, they're usually a series of interviews that tell a story or reveal facts, and they're usually supported by stock footage, cheap location shots. Sometimes they have reenactments, and occasionally they have a narrator. Now, what's great about documentaries, a highly overlooked first film option, is that you usually don't have to pay people that you interview. You're not actually hiring them by the hour. If you are looking for something that it's easy to get 90 good minutes of, it's pretty easy to find. If you get 10 good interviews with people talking about poverty, it's pretty straightforward for you to turn that into a documentary because 10 people are going to talk for an hour each. That's 10 hours of footage, and you only need to get 90 good minutes out of it. If you're doing a feature film, you're shooting a film using a mix of live action, stock footage, and green screen. But you can also create animated films or animated sequences using tools like Character Animator from Adobe. Or it could be you want to make first film an animated project. It's a talking head, South Park style project. And there are tools that make that relatively straightforward. And when you do that, you pretty much just need a voiceover. So you need a script and you need a voiceover, and then you need to learn how to use the animation tools like Character Animator. Stock footage sites make it easy to find establishing shots. Stock footage sites are a great way for you to find all kinds of content very cost effectively, and it can make your project seem much, much bigger. It may be the case that you find a house that you want to use as a haunted house, and it may be the case that house happens to be in the woods. Your establishing shot could be a drone footage following a car down a country lane that has trees on either side. So you don't have to actually go out and shoot that footage, which saves you a lot of time and money. You can just use footage that already exists. Shooting on green screen also lets you put your actors in almost any location. If you need to have your actors have a scene in Paris, or if you want to have them have a scene in Rome, or you want to put them beside a rolling river, you can use green screen to create that background, and then you can just put your characters in front of it. You, as a producer, learning how to do green screen is relatively straightforward. It's not rocket science. Almost any DP that you could conceivably work with will know how to do green screen, and it can make a huge impact on reducing your budget. I strongly recommend that people who are producing a film, any film, but especially their first film, sit down and actually document what's going to happen, like literally every 5 minutes in their film. There's a couple of different reasons to do that. I think it's a good idea to create this kind of little Bible, even before you have a screenplay, because it lets you, as the creator of the project, experiment with maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 different options. It could be the case that you have an idea in your head and you try to fill in the film planning book by filling in the blanks. You put in the key image. This is what the most important image is in the first 5 minutes. And this is what the most important image is in the second 5 minutes, etc. It's very easy for you to think of your film in those terms. And by the time you're done filling in these blanks and putting little images, maybe whether you draw them or you find photographs that represent those images, by the time you've created that little, in effect, Bible, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the movie will look like. And what if you decided before you began to hire a screenwriter or write the screenplay, What if you did that 4 or 5 or 6 times so that you had the opportunity to choose between 4, 5, or 6 movies instead of just picking the first one that came into your head? You may very well find that your first, second, and third idea aren't as good as your fourth, fifth, and sixth idea. And if all you have to do is fill out 8 pages in order to create these little notebooks, you may very well find you save yourself a lot of time and money and you end up with a better film. If you have difficulty figuring out how this might work, try printing out the film planning document and doing and filling in the blanks for a film that you know really well. For example, Paranormal Activity. Let's say that you've seen Paranormal Activities. Try to pretend you're the maker of Paranormal Activities and figure out how you would fill in the blank for what your objectives are, what your key assets and resources are, what your similar films are, and then think about what happens in the first 5 minutes and what's the key scene that makes the first 5 minutes go. And do it again for the second 5 minutes, etc. By the time you're done filling in the blanks for this film you already know that already exists in the world, you'll have a good idea how to handle the same process for creating the film that you actually want to produce. This is a really good exercise, and it's very satisfying exercise because, in a sense, you're acting like a real producer. You're actually picking between multiple projects instead of just taking the first one that comes into your head. Once you have a pretty good idea of the film that you want to create, you are going to have a screenplay is an important thing. While it is possible, if you have a lot of money, to shoot a film like Apocalypse Now, where the screenplay is more of an idea than an actual screenplay, smart people who want to actually get their film produced are going to go ahead and just actually write a screenplay, because a screenplay is basically a Bible for the shoot. Every single person that's working on your project, from the people that are buying the costumes or getting the locations, or the people that are shooting each scene, or the actors that are performing in the project, use the screenplay as a Bible. So without a screenplay, you're going to have a lot of difficulty. The easiest way for you to get a screenplay for your first project is literally to write one. Now, you may not consider yourself a great writer, and you may think to yourself that it would be easier to buy a screenplay. I would suggest that if you want to have a project that hits all the numbers that really matter to you, it's probably better if you at least write the first draft of the screenplay, because you can then bring in a writer to clean it up or to give you ideas about it. But that first draft is important from a variety of perspectives. One, you can take that first draft, register at the Copyright Office, and then you have a screenplay. And if you bring in people to give you notes or give you just as long as you okay those changes, you still own the screenplay. If somebody says, I think this passage is too long, and I make that change, it doesn't mean that they own the screenplay. And if they say this character I think should be a boy rather than a girl, it doesn't mean that they own the screenplay. I'm the one making the changes. It's my screenplay. And you may find that writing the screenplay lets you get more of what you want, costs less, and sidesteps the cost of actually having to purchase a screenplay in a way that's actually very helpful to you for your first project. It also gives you a lot of flexibility if it turns out that during production, you have to make a change. For example, the farmhouse isn't available and you have to shoot in the barn. It would be a drag to be on set, have to make that choice, and then have to find the screenwriter and get his help making the change to the screenplay. You might as well go ahead and make the change yourself. We have several topics that cover how to write a screenplay. And in fact, there's one up there on how to draft a screenplay in 40 to 80 hours using sprint writing techniques. I think if you created that film workbook that I talked previously, and then from that, you start drafting your screenplay, I think it's very straightforward for you to have a screenplay, like 90 pages of screenplay, in about 40 to 80 hours. I think it's a very straightforward process for most people. If you take time to draft your screenplay, you can get coverage from professional readers who will tell you what needs to change or make it better. I think a lot of times people don't write a screenplay because they don't know how to make it perfect. There are coverage. If you write a screenplay, even if it's really bad, you can submit it to professional readers. There's a whole bunch of companies you can submit it to. In the past, I've used We Screenplay, and I submit it to them, and I get 3. You can request multiple readers. I request multiple readers that like horror or whatever, and then they'll send me their coverage back, and they'll have very complete notes to talk about what's wrong. They might say, this character is one-dimensional, or I don't believe what this character does over the course of the project. I think it would be better if they did this and this. And you can take that coverage, incorporate it into your script to make it better, and you'll have a screenplay as good as you probably can afford to buy on your first film. and you won't have had to pay for it in terms of hiring a writer and dealing with all the intellectual property rights involved. If you do decide you want to purchase a screenplay, you can go to sites like inktip.com. There's a whole bunch of screenplays available for sale. There's also a whole bunch of short films, screenplays that you can purchase by making a deal with the writers. If you do acquire a screenplay from somebody else, if you didn't write it, you are going to need a lawyer to make sure that you purchase the right rights from the writer in order to be able to shoot your film, make the changes that you want to make if you have to make them, and then go on to distribute the film in terms of selling it or making it available free online. So you're going to have a lawyer. You're probably going to have a lawyer anyway, but you'll specifically need one if you need to acquire a screenplay. If you write your screenplay yourself, you may need or want to talk to a lawyer just to talk about registering at the Copyright Office, something that you can choose to do. You may want to chat with your lawyer briefly in case you have any questions about that process. Once you've got a screenplay, and especially if you've previously done the film planning work that we talked about previously, your next step really is to start creating a budget for your project. The reason that I say that is by the time you've got a screenplay and you have the beginnings of a storyboard and a beat sheet laid out, then you're in a position where you can actually start putting numbers to things. If you, generally speaking, to the extent that you can, I think you'll be happiest if your first film project uses assets that you can get for free, like locations you or your family and friends own, props that they own, etc. You save a lot of money. If you can get their costumes for free, or you can get them at the thrift store, that's also handy. And if you have, or let's say you've been hanging out with the Ren Fair people and you want to set some sort of time travel thing. What a great thing to know those Ren Fair people, because not only can they appear in your project, but they'll have their own costumes. Any element that you can acquire or get for cheap will help you be much better off financially. That said, you're not going to be able to hire your cast and your crew for cheap. You're not going to want to pay them less than minimum wage for the time that they're shooting, because that's illegal. But if you can get everything else for free, that would be just great. Or as much as you can for free, that would be great. So to create a budget, you're going to look at each scene in your screenplay and you're going to list all the elements. And then you're going to put a price on each element. The reason that you need the screenplay first is because you need to know how many scenes you have, how many are shot in the same location, because that lets you figure out how many hours you need each actor for. I have a workshop that dives deep on how to create a budget and talks about a variety of different techniques, including just using a spreadsheet to create one. When you get a chance, you might want to take a look at it. It's a very fast process once you have the screenplay. You are going to have to pay cast and crew minimum wage, and you're going to cover them with workers' comp insurance. You really have to do that. The reason you have to do that is it's incredibly risky for you personally if you don't. If somebody's working on your set as your actor and they get hurt, or they cut their arm and they're not covered by workers' comp, you are not only responsible for their medical bills, you've got other troubles with the state of California. So to employ people legally and to cover them with workers' compensation is not expensive. It's really not a hassle. You can use sites like Gusto or ADP, who will handle payroll for you and handle sending out people's tax forms to them, and will handle a whole bunch of things for you. And they can also cover your cast and crew very cost effectively with workers' comp by the hour, or however long, by the time you're working on. In other words, it's just very much less expensive to use those kinds of services than trying to set up your own payroll or paying people under the table. It's just not worth it to do that. You are also going to need to spend money on an attorney to create cast and crew agreements. The reason that this is important is that without those agreements, you don't really have the ability to distribute your film. You need signatures for releases from the cast and releases from the crew, who, for example, the DP. If you're a photographer and you take a photograph, you own the photograph, right? If the DP is on your set and he's shooting a film, he owns the film, right? Unless he signed a release. And he's only going to sign a release if you pay him. So you need an attorney to create those documents so that you can legally own the thing that you're planning on distributing for free, or the thing you may want to sell one day, or the thing that you want to submit to film festivals. The attorney may also help you set up an LLC or a corporation as well. The reason you do these things is to protect your personal assets. And you may only set up your company. You may set up a company. It may only be work for a month or 3 months, and then you may close the company down at the end of that process. When you talk to a lawyer, you can discuss how long your company needs to be open for. You may talk to a tax advisor about what's involved in being able to deduct your film expenses from your taxes. because that's a really important thing. Let's say that you are a person, you work a 9 to 5 job, you make X amount of money. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to deduct all the money that you're spending on your film from your taxes? Wouldn't that be great? Because that would make it so that you'd have the opportunity to not just eat that cost as if you were buying a vacation or something. You're actually making a business investment. So it's good to be able to talk to your tax advisor and talk to your attorney, figure out whether or not you need to set up a company, because it may make it so that you can deduct the expenses of producing your film. And you may decide that you want to have one film that produces multiple projects. Who knows? You are probably going to need film production insurance as well. In fact, you're almost certainly going to know it. Film production insurance insures the property damage you might do. You're shooting a horror film, you've driven your little truck up to the horror film and you manage to hit the garage and you break the, if you have film production insurance, it might cover that cost. Or let's say you have your DP, he's shooting and his film cameras actually fall down the staircase and they get all broken up. Film production insurance can cover that cost for you. So when you get a chance, there's a whole bunch of different companies that do film production insurance. You literally buy it by the day. If you have a 5-day shoot and there's 10 cast members, you're insuring 50 people because it's 10 people for 5 days. You want to make sure that the people that are working on your project are insured for the stuff that film production insurance covers. You can call your insurance provider and you say, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you explain the details for them, they'll usually try to figure out how to get you the right coverage at the right price. And it's not a hugely expensive thing as a rule. I want to also mention you don't have to insure just the days you're shooting. You can also insure extra days. So it may be the case, for example, you're planning to shoot your film over 2 weekends, but let's say things get screwed up. Why don't you just buy the film production insurance for 5 weekends? That way, if it doesn't work out these 2 days, the 4 days that you have planned, the 2 weekends you have planned, you can go ahead and shoot the following 2 days, 2 sets of days without buying new film insurance. I'm a big fan of insurance because it's there for you and helpful to you when nothing else ever is. When things go bad, you can find lots of locations that you can rent for film productions on many sites. I like to use this peerspace.com. So you look on peerspace.com and you say that you want to do film production, they'll show you a whole bunch of different locations that you can shoot at. Many of them are very cost effective on a daily rate. Cool. So this is an example of micro budget film budgets, right? And it talks about registering the LLC, getting video releases for people in the film, miscellaneous legal advice and forms, etc. And it's just a random budget. And you might create something that looks like this as well. When you're producing something that's a relatively inexpensive film, your budgets aren't really long. If you say that you're going to produce $1 million film, this is going to be 50 or 60 pages. If you're just producing a $10,000 film or a $5,000 film, then you might only be looking at 3 or 4 pages. If you don't know how to create a budget, check out the workshop that we have on it. If you're going to be a producer or you're going to be a writer producer, not knowing how to make a budget is going to make your career pretty hard to pursue. So it's a good investment to learn how to create those things. Once you've got a budget, once you've got a screenplay, once you've got a film plan, you're going to go ahead and step into the process of finding your cast and your crew and your equipment. If you are not going to be shooting with name talent, expensive people as your cast, I suggest that you look at backstage.com to find a lot of actors that are willing to work. And they have both union and non-union talent. You can choose the kind of actors that you want to work with. If you're hiring regular actors that are not union, then you can say, I want to hire you to work on this number of days at this time. This is how much you'll get paid. I'm going to use this payroll service to pay you, and I'll send you the information so you can sign up. Bob's your uncle. You can make the same kinds of offers to people that are union actors, and in theory, they should decline, because if you're a union actor, you're not supposed to work on non-union productions. If an actor chooses to work with you on your production, that's their business, because it is possible to be a union actor and go Phi Corps and then work on any project, whether it's union or not union. More and more actors are actually choosing to do that. It's also, some actors just go ahead and appear on low budget projects because they want to have stuff that they can use on their reels and on their demo reels and so forth, and because they want to be able to pick up some extra cash, and they don't really care if the union finds out about it, even though it can cause them a lot of trouble. If you have an actor that only wants to work on a union production, then you're going to have to, if you want to work with them, you're going to have to become a SAG signatory. You're going to have to join SAG in order to work with them. And when that happens, your costs go up because there's a set of requirements that the union has in order to work with you. They have some basic agreements, which don't have a lot of rules, but they actually do. I would suggest that you work with a first AD, first assistant director, who's had previous experience working on a SAG project if you're going to do a SAG nano budget or no budget or low budget feature, just to make sure that you dot the I's and cross the T's when it comes to the union obligations. When you look at the SAG Indie agreements, you'll notice it's only a few pages long, but you'll see that it refers to something called the basic agreement. And what they're saying is that this is an add-on to the basic agreement. I think sometimes people are surprised how complex things get, that they may have to put up a bond in order to shoot their project, because SAG requires that you be able to pay all your actors if you're going to work on a SAG project and they don't know who the hell you are. Generally speaking, I think you may want to start with a non-union project as your very first project, and then maybe your next project after that, you do a full-bore union project. If you start looking for crew, there's a whole bunch of different places to look for crew. And if you're in the industry, you may know people that are already DPs and sound editors and so forth. If not, I think you may find sites like Craigslist.com pretty useful. If you place an ad on Craigslist and you say you're looking for a sound editor for a micro budget or nano budget feature film and about 100 little horror film, and you are going to be shooting for 5 weekends in January, and you may get 30 people contacting you or 40 people contacting you saying that they want to work on your project. You have to tell them how much you're going to pay them, or give them some idea. I'm going to pay you $20 an hour or $50 an hour for being a sound engineer on my project. But you'll be shocked how many good quality candidates you get through Craigslist. Whether you're hiring cast through Backstage West, or you're getting crew through Craigslist.com, you have to make sure that you vet every single person that you might want to work with. I like to have 5 or 6 good candidates that I've really looked into before I pick the ones that I actually want to work with. Hiring people is such a hassle that I tend to shortchange the hiring process unless I have some kind of rules. But if I say I need 5 good candidates before I choose the one I actually want to work with, I do a lot better. And I do make sure that I look into people that I'm going to work with. I ask them for references, and then I contact their references, and I look them up on IMDb, and I do as much as I can to research them before I start working with them. And in some cases, I may actually set up an extra day. If I'm working with a DP, I might say, I want to shoot my rehearsals. So could I just hire you for a couple of days to shoot that? And then if I can't work with them on that day, if I find them difficult to work with it, or it's hard to get my footage or whatever, then I know I don't want to work with that DP later. Or if I have crew and I want to shoot the rehearsal and I'm willing to pay them, so when I'm shooting the rehearsal and they're not interested in doing it, I may not want to work with this particular crew member. Testing people before you actually work with them can really save you a lot of time and hassle. I want to mention that if you work with a company, a lot of video editing services, sometimes you hire an editor. You can hire a film editor and pay them by the hour like you pay everybody else. But a lot of video editors actually own their own company, and that company works for the whole bunch of customers. So if they have their own LLC and they are a corporation, it may be the case that you can just pay them a fee to do your editing for you. You'd probably want to chat with your lawyer just to make sure that's kosher. But the point is that different kinds of people that work on your project may, because they own their own companies and because they do something as a business, you might not have to hire them as an employee. Cast and crew, most crew, you will have to pay as an employee, but some people like editors and maybe DPs who own their own companies and have their own equipment, you may just be able to pay them a daily fee to work with you. I want to mention that when it comes to equipment, if you want to shoot your project and you don't want to work, you can, if you're shooting a documentary or something like that, or you are shooting a very low budget feature and you're basically going to be behind the camera yourself, you may find shooting your project on cell phone works really well. The phones we have now and have had for a while are high resolution 4K cameras. And there are even lenses that you can put on the little cameras to make it so that you have telephoto and you have macro lenses. It's ridiculous. The reason I mentioned that is sometimes people who are shooting their very first film blow $5,000 on a red camera. Don't do that. Or they go and spend $3,000 or $2,000 on a Canon camera. If you've never shot a film before, I think you may want to start with something affordable that is not going to break the bank. Because who wants to spend that much money on a camera you may not use again because you may not want to do another film? When you shoot on your cell phone, the content is easy to get off the cell phone because you do that all day, every day anyway. And there are a lot of camera apps you can use that let you create very high quality content on your phone. And I'll go back through some of these links at the end of the presentation, but the camera apps like Pro Camera or Halide let you have all the tools you have on a normal manual camera. They let you specify the frame rate. They let you specify the resolution. They let you specify the f-stops, all that stuff. So you can actually get pretty good quality footage out of your camera using these apps. It's professional quality content. You want to equip yourself cost effectively to shoot your project. You can find tripods and steady cams and photographic lights of many varieties and microphones and so forth that work with your phone on Amazon. So when you get a chance, if you don't have the equipment that you need to shoot your project, I would just recommend that instead of spending quite a lot of money to equip yourself or involving yourself with rental houses, you strongly consider working with cell phone technology for your very first project. So this sort of dives into my specific suggestions for doing productions. One thing's absolutely certain. Make sure that all of your footage is shot at the same resolution. So if you're shooting on a camera, for example, or shooting on a cell phone, for example, for choosing the 4K option and selecting the resolution 3,840 by 2,160 standard 4K resolution at 25 frames per second. Make sure that every single scene that you shoot is shot at that resolution, and make sure that if you purchase any stock footage on pond5.com that you buy it at the same frame rate and resolution. You want 100% of your content to be at the same frame rate and the same resolution. That makes it so that the content is easiest to find distribution for. It's a minimum requirement for people like iTunes and Amazon if you want to sell your product through their stores. And it's the sign of a good filmmaker that you're switching between frame rates and resolutions throughout your film. That's just not going to look very good. The next thing I'd say is make sure you record your dialogue in a silent environment if possible. If you're going to have a party where the beloved couple are talking to one another, you want to make sure that there's nothing. People can pretend to talk in the background, but do not actually have them be talking. The reason is that you want the audio to be on its own track so that if you edit it, you don't hear gaps in background music or crowd murmur and so forth. The other thing I'd mention is if there's music on in the background, you probably don't own the rights to that music. So you're going to get in trouble if you keep that music in your film. So you want to record in a silent environment if at all possible. And you want to make sure, generally speaking, you want to have your actors mic'd, or you want to use a boom mic to get the best possible sound. If you are going to put music in your project, it's best to use non-PRO royalty-free music, because otherwise you're going to owe royalties for the music you use, and you're going to have other obligations to fulfill. Pond5.com makes it pretty easy to get music very cost effectively, and they also can give you sound effects like doors closing and opening, steps going up, people walking across steps, rivers murmuring, etc. And they also have a whole bunch of stock footage, and they're very cost effective. There's certainly competitors for all those things. Use whoever you like best. Make sure when you're shooting your project that you don't have mechanical noises like fans or airplanes or equipment operating or anything else in the background of your audio, because if you do, when you cut, you'll hear the change in the sound of the background sounds. And it's really hard to get those background sounds out of your content. So don't just be aware of music or people talking in the background. Be aware of any background sound. One of the reasons that I strongly urge you to hire a sound engineer to work on your project is because they will help you make sure that the sound quality is actually good. And for many festivals and for many distributors and for many normal audience members, bad sound makes a film unwatchable. When you get done with your project, do make sure you register at the Copyright Office. You may want to talk with your attorney about specifically how to do that and what to put on the forms. If you have the ability to shoot outside California, if your family has a cabin, or you can rent one in Wyoming or Wisconsin or Iowa or Maine or whatever, that might be a better place to shoot than here. And you can use Backstage to actually find actors that work there as well. So Backstage.com actually lets you hire actors throughout the United States. And I think that you actually may be able to hire them around the world, but I wouldn't bet $1 million. I bet you there's people from all over the world that are available through that site for voiceover work, but I don't know how many of them. I don't know if you wanted to cast and shoot something in Mexico, that would be easy to do using their support. Anywhere in the United States, though, they've got great coverage. Every state has its own little film commission. If you Google New Mexico Film Commission or New Mexico or Ohio Film Commission, you'll see that they have a website. And if you look on it, you'd be shocked at how many people are listed there who would be glad to help you make your film in those states. I just mentioned it shooting outside California only because it may be the case that you can bring more visual value to your project if you can. It's less expensive to shoot in other states, and you may want to be able to show some of their natural beauty or some of the things that's unique to them that we haven't seen a lot of times. California, especially Los Angeles, is there a corner of it we haven't seen yet? I don't know. After your film is done, if you've got a good film, you may find distribution for it or sell it directly to audiences on your own profitably. We did a workshop that talks different ways to distribute your work. We talked about OTT sites. We talked about Amazon. We talked about sites where you can make projects available for sale. We talked about a whole bunch of different options. If you're going to work with a major distributor, like a big time distributor for your film, whether it's your first film or any other film, chances are, or if you're distributing a documentary, you're probably going to have to buy errors and omissions insurance called E&O insurance for your film. And that helps cover, if anything, that you might have done wrong when you were setting up your production documents, and any claim that might come from anybody saying that you did something wrong. If you are doing a documentary and somebody says the way you cut the film damaged their reputation, E&O insurance would likely be the thing that would cover that. Some distributors may also have specific deliverables they want you to provide, and there are services that you can use to create those deliverables if desired. When you work with a big distributor, they don't just want you to give them an MOV file or an MP4 file. They may want you to give them separate audio tracks, and they may want you to give them capture information for all of the dialogue in your project so they can create the captions. And all of those kinds of things are stuff if you don't know how to do, there's people that can actually help you. One of the reasons people do films, first films particularly, is because they want to have credits. So the people that are working with you, especially if they're more experienced, your credit actually matters a great deal to them. If you want to make sure that your first film is easy, I would suggest the following. Write the script yourself, shoot in a single location that you can shoot in free, like a farmhouse, an office building after hours, or whatever. Work with a very small cast and crew. Shoot the film quickly using simple technology like cell phones, photography lights, green screen if desired. Find a way to get the images that you need on screen as required to tell your story as quickly, as cost effectively as possible. Do pay a sound engineer so that you get good sound. You want to make sure that you back up your work as you work. So every single day, or maybe even after every shot, you want to make sure that if it's being shot on camera or it's being shot on cell phone, that content is downloaded onto a hard drive, like a SSD drive, or downloaded in such a fashion that it can't possibly be lost. And you want to make sure that you maintain control of that. Many a person has shot a film and not done that, and then they found out that even though they shot many hours of footage, they lost 30 minutes of their film because somebody forgot to back up the camera before they cleared it in order to take the next set of shots. Make sure that you back up the data after every single shot or several times a day, just to make sure that you don't lose any single image that you've actually captured. Make sure that you use legally licensed stock footage, sounds, and non-PRO music. Don't steal from other people, because your film's not going to go away. It's going to be around for years to come. So they have an infinite period of time to come after you. So just don't. Edit the film yourself using iMovie or Adobe Premiere. If you don't know how to use those tools, it's a good time to learn. Adobe Premiere, I think you can rent it by the month for under $50. So there's no reason not to do that. I would suggest, if it's your very first film, that you shoot non-union, because becoming signatory comes with the costs and compliance requirements that you may not be familiar with. Make sure there are no stunts of any kind. Never have any stunts in your first film, ever, of any kind, for any reason, because this vastly increases your insurance costs. People get injured all the time when people are doing stunts, especially first-time filmmakers. If you want to shoot a project that is likely to be the easiest and fastest project to produce and likely to be a very good credit, I strongly urge you to consider doing a documentary. finding a cause that you want to do a documentary about, finding individuals who want to talk about something they're passionate about. Those kinds of things are a great thing to build a documentary around. And documentaries, really, it's just you and your cameraman and your sound guy. You just go from place to place doing interviews. All right, I had a good time hanging out with you guys, and I hope you enjoy the video when it comes available, and that you like the workbooks and so forth. Have a great evening. Okay.